Noon Good afternoon and welcome to the Education Elements from Crisis to Catalyst live discussion this afternoon. I am incredibly excited to be joined by two panelists in which we are going to be discussing turning coaching cuts into leadership opportunities. I'm Dr. Leila Nuland, and I am the Senior Vice President here at Education Elements. I have the privilege of working alongside and leading a team that has a national presence across the country, working in a few hundred school districts where we drive lasting change to meet the unique students you serve. As a former classroom teacher turned education researcher turned executive, one of my personal passions is ensuring that we are providing the right supports for our teachers in the classroom. Because I remember my first years in a high school classroom and the importance of having coaching and instructional support. With that background about me and my interest in the topic that we're going to dive into, I'm thrilled to introduce our co-hosts, or I'm sorry, our panelists that are joining us today. First up, I am joined by Dr. Sean Bulson, Superintendent of Harford County Public Schools in Maryland. Sean, I'm so excited that you're donating your time today. I appreciate you stepping out on what is a busy kickoff for school year 25-26. As former Maryland Superintendent of the Year, and recently having won the Family Engagement Changemaker Award at AASA this past year, I'm really excited about the perspective that you're going to bring to the audience as we dive into this critical topic. Before I introduce our other panelists, I'm wondering if you can give our audience a little bit of background on the community in which you serve and why this topic is important to you at this moment in time.
Sure, of course. Leila, thank you for having me. This is a very timely topic. So I am superintendent at Harford County, Maryland. Harford is about a half an hour northeast of Baltimore. We are predominantly a suburban county, but we have some rural and urban elements in our district. We serve 38,000 students through 55 schools. And I suspect we are confronting a lot of the challenges that everyone is across the country. We've been dealing with some fiscal challenges over the last couple of years, as I know the majority of the other systems I work with have been running into. But I've been fortunate. I have a fantastic team. We've made some hard decisions, but I'm hoping to have a chance to talk a little bit more about the implications for those later in the webinar.
Wonderful. And our other panelist is joining us from the other side of the country, Rindy Ward, Director of Learning Services in Yuma Elementary School District, Arizona. Rindy brings 30 years of experience in education, 15 as a Director of Learning Services, and expert in teacher efficacy, efficiency, and resiliency. And with that, Rindy, do you mind sharing with our audience a little bit of background on the district in which you serve? And I want to give you a special shout out because you are donating your time on what is the first day of school in your school district, which is quite the commitment. So a double thanks to you for taking time out of today.
Of course. I'm happy to do it for you guys. So like you mentioned, we are on the West Coast. So we are tucked in the southwest corner of Arizona, right up against the California border and the Mexico border. So we have 18 schools. We're a K-8 district, and we are just tucked in there. There's some unique obstacles that we overcome, of course, but as many do across the nation. We're very migratory. So our schools, not only do we have a lot of migrant students that go back and forth from California to Arizona because their families work in the fields, but we within our district are also very migratory. So our students tend to hop from one school to another school throughout the year and back and forth. So we service about 9,000 students, and so quite the opposite side of the country.
Well, I'm very eager to dig into the conversation. As a first step, though, I want to make sure that we bring our audience into the dialogue. We really want this to be an interactive session. So, for those who are joining us live, if you have follow up questions or want to dig deeper into a topic that we're covering, please don't hesitate to drop that in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat to make sure I can weave that into our facilitated panel discussion. But first, I want to ask, what one or two words would you use to describe instructional supports in your school system right now? So we always like to start our events and our sessions with a check-in here at Education Elements. So for our audience, I'm asking, what one or two words would you use to describe instructional supports in your system right now? We'll get that question up on the screen for you.
I would say we are data-driven, systematic.
Oh, you're on mute.
If you're looking for my answer at this point, I'd suggest that we're increasingly decentralized.
I see challenged and busy coming up in the comments as well.
Understandable.
I know.
Some unknowns.
So
Like that.
what I'd love to do is give a little bit of background around the challenge and what prompted us here at Education Elements. Oh, Sean, somebody just shared data and working in silos. So this idea of decentralization. I'll share my view when I think about the work that we're doing in schools, specifically supporting instructional improvements. I would agree. I think it's somewhere between decentralized and confused, lacking clarity, maybe, is an area where I'm seeing some of our systems really struggle at this moment in time. So with that, what I'd like to do is give a little bit of background on what brought us to have this conversation today, and then we'll dive in to our panel discussion. The challenge we're all facing, budget cuts are hitting coaching programs hard. 67% of districts report reduced professional development budgets. We also know that external coaching contracts are often the first to be cut. And given the recent cuts in ESSER funding, the traditional support systems that you all were able to put into place are becoming unsustainable. And so when I look at the chat and I see how folks are responding to the check-in, it resonates with what I'm seeing in terms of leaders really scrambling to maintain instructional quality with fewer dollars and resources. So what we know is happening right now is we've kind of fallen into survival mindset. We're cutting programs across the board. We're seeing a reduction in professional development offerings. The funding freeze this summer added additional flux, and I hate using this word, but chaos. And we saw an increasing number of school districts who are unfortunately in a position where they've had to eliminate coaching positions. And we're kind of in this weathering the storm moment in time with our budgets. So I'm sure all of this sounds familiar. What does it mean when we see these budget cuts happening in real time? When I go and I do learning walks in schools, or members of the team here at Education Elements goes out into schools, we also know that there's untapped expertise. So we know that there's instructional leadership in your buildings. I had the privilege of walking through Harford County a few months ago and saw the evidence of that. We also saw that our principals and other teacher leaders are eager to provide coaching and find opportunities where they can provide additional coaching support. And what we know to be true and has been true for years now, whether it was during COVID times or this moment in time, as we see declining enrollment and we see all of the pressures that you are facing, that crisis forces us to innovate and forces us to try new models that we wouldn't have necessarily tried previously. So I'm really approaching this conversation as an opportunity for Rindy and Sean to share where they're seeing innovation in their systems and how they're thinking creatively about providing instructional supports. So our advice coming into this conversation is to make sure that you're identifying where you have instructional expertise, that you're putting extra effort into developing your principals and teacher leaders, that you're thinking systemically about sustainable investments that you can maintain despite any additional budget cut, and thinking about what it means to have strong leadership, whether that's building a profile of a leader or a profile of a staff member. So, with that, what I'd really like to do is turn this to our panel discussion, because everyone's really here to hear from Sean and Rindy, not me. So, my first question for the two of you is if you can walk us through an aha moment. So, when you realized that your budget cuts might provide you with an opportunity.
I can start with that one,
Please.
and I won't start in the topic of coaching necessarily, because the first big aha really in this came for me. I'm starting my 8th year in Harford County, but in my first year, I inherited a budget that really needed some attention, and I had to cut $30 million from that first year budget. And while we were going through this process of cuts, I came in with the attitude that, when you're cutting, there are opportunities to make sustainable changes. Just like when you're adding, you can make sustainable changes because that movement allows you the space to do the work. So something we did in the first year was I recognized, just a couple months into being in the system, that nowhere in our local budget did we have anything that differentiated the needs of schools. In other words, the only place we had differentiation of resources really came through things like Title I. All of our local money was spread out very equally, which we know doesn't achieve the outcomes we're always seeking. And so even though I cut over 100 teaching positions my first year as superintendent, we also put in a staffing model that ensured the schools that needed more had a better ratio of teachers. And that we've been able to sustain through the entire time I've been in the district, whether it's been years we've cut and years we've added, because we built a sustainable structure that reinforced the fact that students with greater needs need more supports. And so that was one of those sort of great aha moments where we're able to use a really difficult time to put something in place that was absolutely essential for us.
Can we dig into that a little bit before Rindy jumps in? That first year as a new leader and having to make a decision like that, one, cuts generally bring out strong voices to board meetings. And the idea that in a district the size of yours, that you're going to differentiate support. Can you share with some of the newer leaders who are going to be listening to this, just how you approached the conversation to set the stage and create an environment where you've been able to push this forward and sustain it?
Mm. Well, first of all, getting it right the first year is fantastic. I mean, a first year superintendent can do a lot more, and it does get harder every year, right? Because the relationships build and your connection to what you have tends to grow, and it gets harder to make the cuts when they're more yours. So that objectivity a new leader brings is definitely an opportunity to be captured. And that's, I see great things happen sometimes when a new superintendent comes in. It's like that person got some really good guidance to make the types of decisions that a first or second year superintendent can make that others might struggle to do. So that was something for me that was kind of a big deal then. But it also came from I was fortunate. This wasn't in the first month of my superintendency. This was in month 7 that these cuts started. So I had the time to, just as every new leader should do, come in, listen carefully to what we were dealing with, know where the district needed to go, at least in some sense. I hadn't come in and made a lot of changes, but I knew if I was forced into a situation where changes need to happen quickly, which is what occurs when you're closing a $30 million budget gap, I was able to, address some of the priorities that had come out during my listen and learn time. And I was able to ensure that I pushed some of the things that I'd established as priorities, before all of that. And so the timing was just right to begin to build the trust. So, the decisions I made were connected to the listening I did, what I learned from the district, what they were doing. They weren't all ideas I brought to the table. They were things that I cultivated, as we were going through that opening. So it was a great opportunity, but frankly, at the time, I also had some outside support from, an experienced leader who helped guide me to getting it right. And that made a difference as well.
Yeah. Rindy, I cut you off. I wanted to dig a little deeper on that one, just given that it was in Sean's first year. So as you think about your aha moment of when this was going to become something that you could seize as an opportunity rather than just a barrier and challenge, what was that like for you?
I think listening to Sean, our story was very different. We had our superintendent had been there for 15 years, and our plan always from the beginning, we knew it was we didn't want it to be a cliff when ESSER funding was over. So we were very systematic and very thoughtful about where we put that money. So when it came to an end, we all of a sudden weren't out, we weren't falling off the ledge because we didn't have any more money to support what we had put in place. So that was always part of our plan. So I think that's kind of the aha, is just, we were just very thoughtful about where we needed that. And the other great thing about that is instruction was always the most important, right? How are we going to make sure our kids have what they need? And so when I was listening to Sean, one of the things that he put in place was kind of that formula for him. And we had already put that in place. We were always tweaking that to make sure that we had the right formula to have not just equity across our schools, right? But instruction was always important. We also looked at now is the time to blow things up, and if we were going to blow things up, what was it going to look like? And I know one of the things when you were talking about, and it makes me sad because of the department I'm in charge of, is instructional coaches, right? When I hear how many people are losing instructional coaches, that's unfortunate. That was one of the things that was never on the table to be lost, right? So that was always held as a priority. So I might be having a second aha moment right now when I'm listening to the statistics across the country, that we didn't have that. That was not, my department, our instructional coaches were very valuable and during our COVID, and continue even before that, and continue to be very valuable to that instructional piece, and how we are servicing our kids, and how we make sure that our teachers are getting what they need to be the best they can be for our students.
So one of the things, Rindy, it's interesting, one of the challenges, and Sean, I'm curious your view. I have a follow-up question here. In the work that we do, what I've seen across my time working alongside schools is there are times when school systems have a very difficult time capturing the impact of instructional coaches to get the buy-in from everybody, right? So depending on your constituents, they may see it as, but there's declining enrollment. Do we need more adults, right? And so I'm curious, how have you been able to demonstrate the impact of the investments that you've made in coaching across your years?
So for us, the key to that is really having a clear understanding of what a coach's responsibility is, and really set those expectations so principals know. And then really the schools where that doesn't come up, it's because the coach and the principal have a strong relationship, and the coach knows exactly what the expectations are at that site, what are the goals. The principal has voiced those, like, this is what we need to work on. This is where, they're going through classrooms together, and they're looking and talking about instruction and what's happening in their building, and they're doing that together, and then they're making a plan. And then the principal is like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Here are my action steps, and here, the coach, here are your action steps. And then just really working on building those relationships between teachers and coaches. Because when those are solid, then they're comfortable letting people come into their classroom and offer support. They don't think of it as, oh, they're telling me what to do, or they're going to report back that I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So it's relationships.
There's so many directions to go with this. So a little bit of the backstory for me is the evening I signed my contract to come to Harford County, the board with the previous superintendent was addressing that year's budget shortfall. And before that night was over, this is again before I arrived in the school system, the board overruled the superintendent's proposal and cut the entire coaching, all of the teacher coaches from the district. I think it was 34 coaches we had in place prior to that night, and they were all cut on about a month before I became superintendent. And so I inherited a district that had no coaches, and I absolutely understood the value of coaches. I'd done a lot of work with them in North Carolina and really could see the value. And so we spent the last 6 years building them back up for a couple of key reasons. One, because the teacher shortage has been an increasing challenge. We have so many more people in our building who are less qualified than the people we would have hired 7 years ago. And so the need for coaches has become so much more acute. This year, I cut nearly $15 million worth of positions. I won't go into the backstory on how we landed ourselves in that spot, but I did have to eliminate a little more than half of our coaches. And so I find myself sort of repeating history. But interestingly, we just went through the whole conversation about the federal funds, and I did a number of interviews with media about, why don't we just cut professional development? That's one of the things that the administration has really talked a lot about. I said, well, first of all, you need to understand that this is a different picture. This is not someone who comes into a building and sits a bunch of teachers down and they sit and take notes and listen. I mean, this is everyday one-on-one interactions with people, helping them succeed with the kids who are sitting right in front of them. So some of building this narrative around what we're talking about, it's not PD as some people outside our world envision it. It's a very different thing from what they're thinking about. It's absolutely essential day-to-day support for people who are coming into the profession with less preparation than they did just 5 years ago. And so that's part of the conversation. That's part of what the advocacy will need to be over the next few years, as we're concerned about what might happen with title funding and future budgets. But then how do I continue to support that here, highlighting that, we have many more, less certified people than we did. And so, I mean, the coaching just is so incredibly important, but we need people to understand how that looks. It's not PD, which sometimes gets sort of this pejorative narrative around it.
I love this idea of reframing the narrative and helping people understand a more holistic and develop a more holistic view of professional development, right? Whether it's a workshop or event, which sure, those happen and sometimes have value, but this idea of what does it mean to really develop our staff? Rindy, when you think about your district's ability to maintain your coaches, how have you set the bar and ensured that you have consistency, but also ensuring that you're differentiating? So when we talk about one-to-one, whether we're talking about the classroom, at that teacher level, building level, but also ensuring that you have some kind of standard for what this is supposed to look like as they go out into the buildings. How have you done that in your system?
So one thing that's really important for us, the instructional coaches, and I have 15 instructional coaches, and I also have some coordinators. I have a math coordinator, and we're an AVID district, so I have an AVID coordinator, and I have 2 EL coordinators because we have a high EL population as well. So with that team, we come together and we meet routinely, and we have conversations around instruction, and we're looking at data and what's going on at our sites. I also, part of our system for instructional coaches is we have very different parts of our district, right? We have our older district, our older schools that have been there forever and are seeing declining enrollment. And then we have another area, east side of our district, that is their student population is just exploding. And we need, on our future is going to be a new school needs to be built because there's just so much moving out towards the east. And those are very different needs. And so part of it is my instructional team is made up at my elementary that go to K-5 schools. They share schools, and there is a primary and an intermediate coach, because that's a lot. K-5, that's a lot of different needs in K-5. So I've separated that they get to work as a team, and they go out and they have an east side school, they have a north end school, and they have kind of midtown, so that they get to see all ranges of the needs of the schools. And so they come back together and they're talking with other coaching teams and, what are you doing to meet the needs of your teachers? And when they're experiencing this, or if the school with their high EL count, they have, those EL coordinators are supporting them. But we really look at data and talk about and really try and isolate and figure out what each school needs. So there is consistency across, but there's lots of conversations about what specifically is happening at those schools and what goals they have and what areas of instruction they need to improve upon.
So, Sean, you're in a different position, right? Where you haven't been able to maintain the same number of coaches. And I know that you're constantly thinking about making sure that your students who have the greatest need are getting the resources they need. So what does that mean for you going into this school year? How are you working with your building leadership and other leaders in the system to offset that loss in that type of instructional support?
So, I think this is a slightly different conversation from what Rindy's dealing with, right?
Yes.
So, because I can make the case for why coaches are important, but when I don't have them, I need some other solutions. And so, but this is sort of this is more on the leadership front. So, first of all, whenever I've seen schools that are sort of breakout performers that are performing well above maybe what they're sort of placed on the scatter plot would predict for them, I always find the same thing. I find effective teams. And so the first part is, how do we ensure that the teams, and so are there other ways for me to adjust? We're still looking at things like, okay, if I've had to take these supports away, are there responsibilities I can remove from teachers, for example? Are there things I can do to take off their plate to give them the time to be together more? Because we know our teachers need more planning time. They need more time. And if they don't have someone else to come in and bring this information, they need the time to put together and do it themselves. And so, finding a way to foster the teams, but also thinking about the responsibilities for them. Another element there is this premise of trust, because you can't build a strong team by telling them what to do. You need to offer them the trust and the resources and the support to do it themselves. And so even from a leadership perspective, our principals will always step up. But I'm actually particularly cautious about the principals who want to go in and take over the role of the coach, and they want to go start modeling lessons and things like that. Not because it isn't, always a good thing to do, but my guidance to them is, listen, let your teachers be the experts. Give them the resources they need. Give them the support. And it's funny that the last comment in the chat here is about data. One thing, when I think of central office, one thing we can do for schools is make sure we give them easy access to data. It's everything I can do to get data pumped to schools so they don't have to go digging around for it, because data is, don't use it as a weapon, give it to them as a tool that they can use to, support them because that's a bit of a force multiplier. If, you don't have a specialist coming in to walk them through all the data, you have to make it available to people so they can work with it, have their own take on it. So one thing I'm able to do centrally is we've built data dashboards for every possible thing. And that's been deliberate over the last 5 years. What else can we build? And in some cases, people feel a little overwhelmed by this, but the point is, let me give you that as a starting place. So if nothing else, those of you who really are willing to take the time and sit down and figure this out, you have that resource. That's something I can help with that doesn't require 30 FTEs. So between helping the leadership focus on trust, providing supports, removing barriers, there's still a lot of moves we can make to ensure the focus stays on that constant improvement coming from the teams. But I think the one thing that always defines breakout success in schools is effective teams.
Can we go down this road right now? Because I think the commonality maybe that we'll find across your two systems is many of the principals stepped into that leadership role during COVID era or as we were coming out of it and had much more of an operational focus than an instructional focus. And so setting instructional coaches aside and how many you each have and where the budget's going, how are you supporting your principals? Sean, your point of building the team versus principals stepping in, right? They can't teach math, English. They don't know all the subject areas. So you do have to defer to your teachers, but you do have to take on instructional leadership in some way. I'm curious, how are you building your building leaders up at a time where I'm consistently hearing from district leaders that that's an area where they're pretty green. They're fewer years in the classroom themselves. So if you weren't teaching for 20 years where you have a deep understanding of what good looks like and things to watch out for, how are you investing in your building leadership as instructional leaders beyond the data? So Rindy, maybe you can kick us off, and Sean, I can come back to you, but I'd love to explore this a little bit more because it's a common persistent challenge that I'm hearing when I'm out in the field.
Yeah, when we come together in our admin meetings, we have created different groups. One of our associate superintendents last year, she organized all the administrators in smaller groups, because I think when you're in smaller groups, you can be a little more vulnerable, and so you're willing to kind of offer up, oh, I need some support here. So that was very helpful. And then taking that information and then coming back and then meeting and working kind of on those areas where they need some more skills and more confidence built. So that was one way in small groups. And then we also looked and we look at, and I know data is kind of a bad word sometimes for people, but important. And we look at like where are we seeing those pockets that things are going really well, and then we're really digging down and talking to administrators and what are they doing. We also have other administrators, those kind of that are leaders in the groups. We really try and set up opportunities that they're talking with and kind of matching people up with strengths and weaknesses. And when we're in meetings, and so they can really share those experiences and kind of gain strengths from each other. But it's very like when we don't usually just place people, don't just sit wherever. We're kind of very particular and very strategic about who we're partnering different administrators with, really looking at and what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, their areas of growth. Sorry. And then we really ask them to set goals. And so then we have access to all those goals. So all of our directors have access to those goals. So we know what we can help those principals with, and our superintendent and associate superintendents all know. And then just, of course, again, I go back to, I can't say it enough, just the relationships between the instructional coach, because they do have the experience in the classroom, sometimes many more years than what our principals do. And so if they're really working closely with each other, they can really help strengthen their areas as well of need. So
I think from my perspective, it's a larger district, and some of those deliberate pieces, on some level, you have to come back to the core beliefs that you bring to the table. Because I've been in situations where, what the leadership promoted was competition, right? And some would argue that motivates people, but it also tremendously demotivates, and it creates silos, and and sometimes that competition can go sideways. And so I deliberately, it's not, here's the school that's doing really well, everyone look at them. And I think you see that in a lot of places, and there's always an instinct to want to do that to motivate people, but I think it works the other way. So some of it is about, staying consistent with how you're messaging success. This really is, every chance I get, success is still a collaborative effort. There is no way I'm successful on my own, but there's no way any individual working for me is successful on their own either. And so staying really focused on those core beliefs. But the other side too is, from the leadership perspective, doing everything you can to help cut through the noise. Say, I know you're hearing this, I know you're hearing this, I know you're hearing this. These are the areas where I want you to not forget to focus. We're kind of going through the same thing everyone else is. My number one priority, and my group is very clear on this, is 100% of the time it's going to be reading, right? Even though I'd love to see our math move faster, but when they pivot and go away from that number one priority, I see it. And so if I can cut through and say, so a big part of what we try to do is, as a leader, my job is to protect them from some of the noise, or to take it on myself. It's to cut through it, make sure they're clear on what the vision is, that they're clear on what the core beliefs of the district are. And that, I constantly am going back to my same visual, but our role is to support the central services. Our building supports the principals. The principals support the teachers, because the teachers need to be able to support the students. So if you don't have a model that's built on trust, and I would say that's trust flowing up from central services to the students, as opposed to the other way around. So for me, it's just back to those core beliefs.
So I want to follow on this idea of core beliefs and relationships. As you enter the first day of school, Rindy, you're on day one. Sean, day one is in another...
November 2nd. We got a little while.
Okay, so you've got a little bit of time. How are you articulating what instructional excellence means in your systems? What does that look like as we have folks across the country kicking off this week and in the coming weeks? What are some of the things that you're putting into place, or Rindy, you've put into place as you start today, for everyone to know this is what instructional excellence is in Yuma, this is what instructional excellence is in Harford County?
I can go. We actually did a lot of work with education elements in the last several years, working on.
I didn't mean to tee you up that way, but thank you.
It's an appropriate answer, though. It's not just for. We worked really hard with education elements to really work on our instructional vision and make sure that everyone from the top central office all the way down to custodians know what our vision is, right? It's very important for us to focus on the whole child. And so we have our core beliefs as well. And we have conversations around this. What does our instructional vision, it's about rigor, right? It's about planning. And so what does each of those components of our instructional vision, we broke it down word by word by word, and we have had conversations from our top admin all the way down to instructional our teachers, our paraprofessionals. They're having conversations at their site about what that means. What does it mean for us when we say whole child? What does that mean? Right. So every single piece of that we have really, and we've created presentations from the central office, from my department, that are, because that is one thing you want, right? Autonomy is great, but that's not something you want autonomy on. Everyone needs to know this is what the instructional vision is. This is what it means, and this is what it looks like in the classroom. This is what it looks like in the principal's office. This is what it looks like in the central office. And so that's been very, very important that we've had those conversations, and we've created those kind of those presentations, those slide decks, we've set up the questions to have the conversations, and that's been shared across all of our 18 sites for our principals to deliver. Our instructional coaches, when they're having conversations with teachers, they're sharing the same information with those that the principal is having. When our superintendent goes out and they're talking to staff, the same words, right? Everything, it's consistent across the board. And you have to make time. And everyone's like, well, you're just going to have a conversation, but you have to make time for those conversations about instruction, so everybody understands and everybody is on the same page about what it means from site to site, from my department to the ESS department to the migrant department. We all have to be on the same page about what instruction means and what the core beliefs are in our organization as well.
So from my perspective, I'll just put this in as a joke. We haven't enlisted education elements to do this for us, or maybe we'd be farther along. But what folks will see this year is our team has done a great deal of work on its instructional framework. And we've created the base for that instructional framework. And I hear about that a lot when we're talking leadership in school systems. And so, but the framework that our team built, I'm very proud of the work. And what they've looked at is, what do students need to be able to know and do at each level? So we started with reading, but it's not just, here's the standard for this, here's the standard for this. It's helping clarify for teachers, how does this look different in 5th grade than it does in 7th grade? So that people can see that picture going up across the continuum in these areas where the work should be building. So people understand, because, one of the greatest concerns I always have with, when you see the variance in outcome across schools, particularly when you look at different populations in schools, you don't always see the coherence of standards, where you may find that one school serving a certain population is maintaining lower standards for the students than another school, and keeping track of that is so hard. And that doesn't come from a place where people are trying to do harm. It evolves naturally, but it's something you really have to guard against. And so having this framework that shows the relationship between kindergarten and 12th grade in areas, and so that's what our team is working on now. And I think that's something I'm really encouraged to see, because we've had concerns there, and I would like to see that be something that we strengthen, because, one thing I talk about frequently is we know we need to keep elevating the rigor. And that's something we talked about for years ago, and we kind of lost sight of for a little bit, but I feel like, we've had to come back to that, because, we spent a few years during the pandemic just trying to help people feel safe, and but the rigor needs to come back. Unfortunately, we've seen it. But those frameworks are so essential. So having the team spend the time sitting down and having those discussions about how this looks across, 14 grades that we serve, is really essential.
Yeah, you have to make time for that.
I love that, as we're wrapping up this idea of, as we look back, right, we were reactive, because we had to be, and looking at what was right in front of us, and now turning our attention to vision and framework and elevating rigor, right? We have to be future forward in our thinking and our leading around instruction. Before I close us out, I'm wondering if each of you could just share one piece of parting advice for all of the new leaders who have stepped in this summer, knowing that there's a lot of pressure at the state level with different legislation around math and reading, right? There are pretty significant shifts there. There's still uncertainty with budgets and what long-term will look like for our systems. But if you could each provide one piece of parting advice for those who are going to be listening to us today.
I could start. I'm going to give it two, because the first thing that came to mind is something I touched on earlier. Particularly being new in this. I mean, I was a new superintendent and didn't even know what help I needed. and didn't have a coach, a mentor, and executive, whatever you call it for the superintendent's role. And it took me a bit the first couple of years. And when I actually did reach out for help in a time, again, when I had to deal with this huge budget, getting someone in who could help, construct a path for me that I led, was absolutely game changing. And so a piece of advice, number one, don't be afraid to ask for help. Be thoughtful about where you seek that help. But I think there's a lot of expertise out there. And the second part that I kind of wanted to share is you have to think through that trust model, right? That quick wins are possible for just about any leader, but done the wrong way, they're not sustainable. That a slower, we've all been trained, get the buy-in, go through the right pieces. That's so essential. I've seen so many change agents who are new leaders come in, they're going to move that data right away. The trouble is they don't last and it's not sustainable. You got to think about that longer term plan. So slowing down, figuring out what are the priorities and how am I going to do this the right way so that the work is sustainable. And you can only do that by moving culture, and you move culture slowly and carefully.
So true. It takes a lot of time, and it takes you have to plan for those conversations. I think for us is really determine what is your vision, who are we as a district, right? What do we stand for? What do we believe in? If we say our students are the most important, then no matter how much money you have, then it needs to be figure out how to make sure everything has to go back. Is this what's right for the students? And does this follow our vision? Does this meet the beliefs that we have for our district? And if it doesn't, then you need to let it go. I think the other thing is it's just important to listen, right? And I talk, relationships are super important, but yes, you want people to get to know you, but it's also you need to get to know and understand people. And so make sure that you're listening. This year we have a new superintendent coming on. So we had our previous superintendent was with us for 15 years. And so our new superintendent, who has been the CFO and is now our superintendent, he's just asking a lot of questions and saying, if you don't feel like you're heard, please, I want to hear, come talk to me. Right. So I think it's relationships and what are your beliefs, and make sure everything just is supporting what those beliefs are.
Well, I want to thank the two of you for your time. Rindy, dialing in on the first day of school is really a gift.
By the way.
That's fantastic. And Sean, I think this is day one after having a little bit of time off this summer. So thank you both for taking this on and sharing your insights and experiences. I want to highlight a few things that I heard in terms of sustainable leadership. So whether you're in a position where you have the privilege of keeping your coaches on, or if you're in a situation where you've had to make some cuts or significant cuts, and we're seeing a real range right now across the country, there's some common themes that I heard as I was listening to Sean and Rindy that align with what we would recommend as best practices moving into this school year. So making sure you know your people, right? So as Rindy highlighted, making sure that we're listening, also making sure that we're leveraging each other. So Sean, your comment about encouraging your principals to not just try to do it all themselves, right? There's expertise in your buildings that you need to leverage. Rindy highlighting how your instructional coaches are working in partnership with principles around instructional leadership. Making sure that this isn't top down, where yes, you need vision, common language, alignment. We here at Education Elements call it freedom within fences. But what are those guardrails? What are those fences that make us Harford County or make us Yuma, right? And then from there, letting our school leaders take that vision and make meaning of it. And all the while, as central office leadership, keeping in mind that we do need differentiated support at the school level, whether that's resource investment, whether that's the way that we lead them, but that really brings us to that cultural alignment. Your comment, Sean, earlier about being really slow and careful on culture, that's how you make sure that you're nimble, that you don't drive so much change or make it so top down that it breaks things, it becomes brittle. So I really appreciated that insight in today's conversation. And then finally, Rindy, I want to come back to something that you shared that I think is important. As yes, we're seeing declining budgets. We know that and anticipate that the states will be investing in education in some way in the coming months. We also know that our school systems are looking for grant opportunities, but this idea that whatever dollars you're investing, that you're thinking about what that looks like over time, right? Making sure that it's sustainable the way you all set out when ESSER funds were initially released. So I do want to elevate that as we move forward and we think about future forward budgeting, which is something I'm talking a lot about recently. So as we close out, I would like to highlight a resource that we have put together here at Education Elements. It's our Core 4 toolkit. As we think about making sure that we're leveraging the expertise in our buildings and we're equipping our staff with the right resources and strategies to do right by our students and to align their instruction with our visions and frameworks, this is a great resource that we have found that the 1% shift. So Sean, this idea of moving slowly and thoughtfully and carefully, in this toolkit, you'll learn about that 1% shift mindset of just how can I make steps toward evolving as a teacher, as an instructional leader, and what that can look like in a manageable way in my classroom. I also want to highlight that Sean recently joined us on the K-12 Change Equation podcast, where we were talking about how he's thinking about the future of his school system and all of the great work that's happening across Harford County. So for our audience members who have not yet subscribed to our podcast, I encourage you to do so and definitely listen to the episode in which we interview Sean. It was a fantastic conversation. And once again, thank you for donating your time today, Sean. Rindy, thank you so much to our audience for dialing in. And I just want to encourage everyone that as we move forward into this upcoming school year, we all need to be thinking about what are the sustainable changes that we can make, understanding we're going to have to continue to flex with rapid technological advancement, with shifts in our student population. The one constant that we know will be true is that we have to adapt to the changes in front of us. And we were able to hear from 2 leaders who have done just that in their school systems. Thank you, everyone. And I'm wishing you all a fantastic start to the school year.
Thanks, Leila.
Thank you.
Thank you both.